Hey guys, Mr. Gibson here. I'm going to take you guys through a macroeconomics FRQs real quick. Um, so, first question here, typical first question on an AP exam, where we are going to look at the macroeconomy ASAD curves and talk about policy actions and all that good stuff. Okay, and I'm looking at this whole thing, and it looks like it's everything you guys, uh, everything that could be covered on the exam. But anyway, so that is, it doesn't have any international trade stuff on there. Okay. Anyway, we have assumed the economy of Artland is currently operating above full employment. We want to draw this ASAD curves, show the equilibrium output, and show the full employment output. Of course, you guys won't have to draw this on your exam, but it's a very good idea for us to know what's going on with this. So ASAD curves, output versus price level. We have a long run aggregate supply curve. This represents our full employment level. Okay. We have an upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve and a downward sloping aggregate demand curve. Okay. Just for proper, just Y sub 1 and PL sub 1. And I drew it to the right because the right of the long run aggregate supply curve because we're above full employment. Okay. Assuming the central bank and the government do not take any policy actions to close the outcome gap. On your graph, show the how the economy automatically adjusts in the long run and label the new equilibrium. PL sub 2. Explain the cause for the adjustment shown in B sub 1. Okay, so the short run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, like so. Okay. And the reason it will is because nominal wages will rise. Okay. Nominal wages will rise. That's a good enough explanation for the test. It really is. A little more context and content and theory behind that is think about it. If there's, if we're above full employment, there's not a lot of employees, not a lot of people to hire out there. So to compete that way, you have to raise your wages. Likewise, there's some inflation, so people will want their higher wage. And so as that happens, nominal wages rise. And as nominal wages rise, short run aggregate supply shifts to the left. Okay. Alternatively, suppose the government wants to close the outcome gap using a fiscal policy. Okay. So that's like this pink line never happened. And so we're faced with inflation. Okay. Identify a fiscal policy action the government could implement to close the output gap. Okay. And then how will the fiscal policy action identified in Part C1 affect the following? The unemployment rate, the national rate of unemployment, and then 3, in closing the output gap, will the automatic adjustment identifier in Part B1 produce a higher, lower, or same price level compared to the fiscal policy identified in C1. So this is a great example for you guys of where, granted, you don't have to draw graphs, but man, it's going to be important to draw graphs. Okay. So I'm thinking, all right, the government controls this AD line or part of it because they control government spending. And a fiscal policy action they could take is they want to take fiscal policy actions that will shift the AD curve to the left. Okay. 2 ways they can do that. They can decrease government spending, or they could increase taxes, which will decrease consumer spending. Okay. All right. So that's their 2 choices here. Okay. Now, so we didn't have to really answer that with the graph, but the graph's going to help us with the next 2. Okay. So 2, how will affect the following? So Y sub 1 shifts back here. We'll call this Y sub 3, which is the full employment level. And so unemployment will actually rise. And they kind of want that to happen because they're more concerned about inflation than they are unemployment. Okay. The other thing is the natural rate of unemployment. Well, this AD curve has no effect on this long run aggregate supply curve. So there is no change in the natural rate of unemployment. It just stays steady right there. Okay. And then number 3, it says, in closing the output gap, will the automatic adjustment identified in Part B produce a higher, lower, or same price level compared to the fiscal policy identified in Part C1? And as you guys can tell, um, and again, this points to why it's important to draw a graph, is sure enough, they won't have the same price level. If the government were just to allow it just to naturally automatically stabilize the economy, you'll have a higher price level. Whereas if the government intervenes, you'll actually have some deflation. Okay, so no, we will end up with a lower price level uh, if the government intervenes than if there was just an automatic stabilizer. So in this question, um, so the automatic adjustment produces a higher price level compared to the fiscal policy. Okay. All right, on to D. We're going to talk about this loanable funds market. Show the effect of the fiscal policy action identified in C1 on the equilibrium interest rate. So if we've cut government spending, okay, all right, we've got supply, we've got demand. I might draw 2 just to show you guys that you can kind of do it 2 different ways. Okay. One way to look at this, you guys, is that here's the real interest rate versus the amount of loanable funds, real interest rate against the amount. Again, I'm doing that very quickly because you won't have to do this. So if the government is cutting government spending or raising taxes, that means they have generated more revenue for themselves, which means that you have greater national savings, okay, which shows a fall in the interest rate. Okay, interest rate falls. You could also think of it on a kind of a demand side. If the government was to no longer have any deficit spending, they would no longer demand loanable funds like they did. So the demand for loanable funds would go down. But overall, either way that you look at it, same effect here where you have a reduction in the real interest rate. Okay. Given the interest rate change identified in D, will the long run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, shift to the left, or remain unchanged in the long run? So this one's kind of tough because more often than not, nothing is going to really change the long run aggregate supply curve, except for a few things: technology, population change. But usually, government spending is not going to change it. You could make an argument that government spending could if it improves infrastructure, makes capital more productive because of infrastructure, something like that. But but the only thing the government can somewhat affect with the long run aggregate supply curve is how interest rates will affect this in the long run. So the idea here is if the interest rates fall as they have, uh, that means it's more attractive to take out loans, obviously. And when it's more attractive to take out loans, businesses increase their investment spending. If they increase their investment spending, that means we create more capital, the type of goods that make more goods. So obviously, if we've created more goods that make more goods, we're more productive. Okay, the more capital we have, we're more productive, and that will actually shift the longer and aggregate supply curve to the right. Okay, so if interest rates fall, you have higher capital formation, which shifts the longer and aggregate supply curve to the right. If interest rates rise, the long run aggregate supply curve shifts to the left because you have less capital formation. Okay, so that was that. Actually, let's look at the answers real quick that the AP gives us. All right, upward slope in short run aggregate supply, downward slope in AD. It's the right of the full employment, as you guys can see right there. Here is when no policy action is taken, how the short run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left. Its explanation here will shift to the left due to the increase in input prices, nominal wages, or inflationary expectations. One of the three. Kind of talked about all that. Specifically, nominal wages, right? Higher. There's a lot of employment out there to attract more employees, more labor. You have to raise your wages. Input prices, again, same kind of thing here. A lot of inputs are being used. There's a pressure on those prices to go up, and inflationary expectations. We've experienced some inflation, so people will adjust their expectations of their wages or their prices or everything else up to whatever the inflation is. Okay. The short run aggregate supply curve only really works is because we have surprise shocks to inflation or deflation. Okay. Let's see. Increase in government spending, decrease in transfer payments, or increase in taxes. Okay. One point is stating the unemployment rate will increase, natural rate of unemployment will not change. And again, here, automatic adjustment will produce a higher price level than the fiscal policy. Again, you're going to have to trust the graph on that one. Again, it's important to still graph on these tests, even if they don't ask you to. Okay. 1 point is earned for drawing this curve. And again, here's the two examples. You can either show the increase, the rightward shift in the supply, or the leftward shift in demand. And the final one is the long run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right, and lower real interest rate will increase capital formation due to increased investment spending. All righty. Number 2, current account, foreign exchange. That's not on our test, so we're not going to worry about it. So let's go to number 3, and here is a classic specialization and trade problem. Cannot wait. All right. We've got Sweden and Norway. They have a choice between producing food or capital goods. Okay. And so we've got Sweden that can produce 50 food or 100 capital goods, or Norway that has the trade off between 30 food or 120 capital goods. Okay. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the production possibilities curve for Sweden. Place food on the horizontal axis and capital on the vertical axis. Plot the relevant numerical values on the graph. Very easy problem. Awesome. Okay, so we're doing Sweden. All right. What would you say? The horizontal axis is food. So we go food versus capital goods for our country, Sweden. All right. They can produce 50 food versus 100 capital goods. Let me make sure it said something about our I wish it had said something about constant opportunity cost, but let's just assume that it will. So if it has constant opportunity cost, we'll just have a downward sloping curve like that. Okay. If it was increasing, it would kind of curve like this, increasing opportunity cost. But for right now, let's just do constant. Okay. On your graph in part A, indicate the following: a point that represents the efficient level of production, E. Okay. So efficient means that we're along the curve. We're fully utilizing our resources. Inefficient, we're not fully utilizing our resources, so we're going to be inside the curve. So we're going to label that I. And then U is impossible. So that's outside the curve. So anywhere outside the curve. Okay. C, assume Sweden moves from producing 20 units of food and 60 units of capital goods to producing 30 units of food and 40 units of capital goods. what will happen to economic growth in Sweden in the future. Okay. Uh, so their economic growth will actually slow. Okay. And the reason why is because they're producing less capital goods. They're less productive. Okay. If they continue to make the 60 units of capital goods, um, it's a lot like that long run aggregate supply curve question that we just got. So if they make less capital goods, they're not as productive. Okay. That's the overall. Okay. Which country has comparative advantage in production of capital goods? Explain. Okay, so we're gonna have to do a little math. Okay. Um, so it's this country with the lowest opportunity cost. Okay. So Sweden. Oh, let me do this opposite. Sweden makes 50 food per 100 capital goods. So they give up half a unit of food for capital. Okay. Versus Norway, it's 120. Oh, excuse me. 30 per 120 food per capital, which that's going to equal 1/4. Okay. So Norway actually has the lower opportunity costs. They only give up 1/4 of a unit of food per capital goods, whereas Sweden gives up 1/2 a unit of food per capital good. Okay. Based on the table above, identify a specific number of units of capital goods that could be traded for 10 units of food and be mutually beneficial. Okay. So we're going to have to keep it between kind of these two prices here. Okay. All right. So um, the idea here is okay, for 10 units of food. Okay. For Sweden, since food costs 1/2 of per capital goods, they're going to need to at least get 20 capital goods in exchange. Okay. Because otherwise they could do better. They could do better if they could do, like, um, say if it was just 10 for 10, they'd be like, well, we could give up some food to get those capital goods. Okay. Um, for Norway, they don't want to give up more than 40 capital goods in this trade. Okay. Because if they give up, because that's 1/4 food per capital. If they give up more than that, then they could have been better off just making their own food. Okay. So let's look at the scoring guidelines real quick. Okay. Oh, flip that around, but whatever. Pointers. So we showed all those points. 1 point is earned for saying that economic rate would slow or be reduced. We explained that. Didn't have to. Explain that Norway has comparative advantage in capital goods, and for explaining that it's the lowest opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of producing 1 unit of capital goods is 1/4 unit of food, and in Sweden, it's 1/2 unit of food. And you can decide on a number between 20 and 40 for capital goods. All right. Thanks, you guys, for the attention, and